So this is a one lander, but we're on the draw, and we can actually cast a lot of our spells. So I'm gonna keep this. We've got a lot of stuff we can do with our mana, but looks like we are up against Affinity here, so that's pretty bad news. Um, just because this isn't a hand that's very good against Affinity. Affinity is also one of the more difficult matchups. So yeah, we're just gonna play Polluted Delta here, pass the turn. We have Spell Snare available. So if our opponent plays something like a Ravager or a plating, we have the option of spell snaring it. And Affinity does tend to have a lot. The most powerful cards do cost 2. There's Steel Overseer. So here's a Ravager. We're just gonna want to go ahead and counter that. And I actually like just getting the basic island in order to counter the Ravager. Because we're banking, we need to draw more lands if we're gonna win this game. So this is gonna help preserve our life total. And it's a little bit unlucky, okay, to draw the second basic island here. So the question is how to proceed. I like thought scouring ourselves, getting cards in the graveyard. Then we can follow up with Serum Visions if we want to do so. So yep, gonna Serum Visions. Now we are looking for colored mana. We found a Delta, which is nice. Definitely don't want the Snapcaster Mage. The Gitaxian Probe, it does help trigger our Young Pyromancer, which is kind of nice. So, yeah, I'm going to put the Probe on top. And it's a little bit weird to draw the second basic island. The odds were against that happening, of course, but it did happen. And we just have to deal with it. So, I like respecting our opponent having another 2 mana play and just passing here rather than running out the Young Pyromancer. So we see a Mox Opal. And this looks to be... Okay, there's a plating, so we're definitely going to want to counter that. And this time, let's get that Blood Crypt into play. So the way we're going to counter it is with Snapcaster Mage. We're going to go Snapcaster Mage. We have a Spell Snare, actually 2 Spell Snares in the graveyard, so we can target one of them. And if this plating were to resolve, we would be basically dead here because we have no way of actually answering this Etch Champion. So we need that Etch Champion to not get pumped up at all. Although it is going to get pumped up a little bit by this Signal Pest here. So it's going to mean 3 damage. And now we can just play the Young Pyromancer and try to get that going. So let's do that. So we'll play the Young Pyromancer here. There's also an argument to Collective Brutality, I suppose, but or Snapcaster plus Brutality. Don't really like it that much. So I'm going to take the shock off the Watery Grave and probe. We're going to pay the mana for the probe, though. Alright, so we see our opponent's hand, and it is a Springleaf Drum. So that's good news. And the question now is, do we want to attack into this Memnite with our Snapcaster Mage? And I think that's fine. I think we're fine with making that trade. And our opponent's not going to make it, so we can just go ahead and follow up with, we can play either Tasker here or go for Murderous Cut. I think we actually want to go for Murderous Cut to save damage. We can Murderous Cut away the Signal Pest, and if our opponent activates Blinkmoth Nexus, that's gonna be even more important. So, yep, let's go ahead and get rid of the Signal Pest. So, just choosing what to exile, essentially. And so we're actually ahead in this race right now. Our opponent can deal us 3. 3 this turn. That would put us to 8, but we have 6 power worth of attacking creatures coming back, and we've also got more gas in our hand. We know there's only one unknown card in our opponent's hand. So it looks like the play from our opponent is going to be to leave the Blinkmoth Nexus behind. And that's going to mean an Arcbound Ravager. So that is really bad news. Because we were basically just hoping to dodge that. Basically dodge for a turn. And we weren't able to do that. So now our opponent can sacrifice these artifacts and essentially move in on the Etch Champion. So the question is, how can we handle this Arcbound Ravager? And not sure that we can. We can bolt it, causing our opponent to sacrifice 3 artifacts. So let's go for the bolt, see how our opponent responds. We're hoping that our opponent just lets the Ravager die here, even though it's kind of likely that our opponent just sacrifices some artifacts now. So yeah, it looks like our opponent is going for the play of sacrificing artifacts in order to make the Arcbound Ravager bigger. So we could go Snapcaster Mage plus Murderous Cut, but that isn't going to do anything because those counters are just going to go on to the Etch Champion, essentially. So just going to pass the turn, although we're basically dead here. So, yep, there's a Vault Scourge. And our opponent does need to make sure that they have enough artifacts in play in order to have the Etch Champion have Metalcraft. So that is a key point here in terms of if our opponent decides to move in on the Ravager. So it looks like the play is going to be to move in right now on the Etch Champion, and that's going to mean that we're not dead right away. So from that perspective, that's good. So we've got to figure out if we can. We have draws here basically, so we can go Snapcaster Mage, and it looks like we might actually have lethal now. So we can go Snapcaster Mage, get back the Murderous Cut, and Murderous Cut away the Vault Scourge. And then our opponent is going to be left without a blocker. And we're going to get an Elemental here. So we can actually now attack back for lethal. Wow. I believe this is going to work in our favor. I thought we were just dead, to be honest with you. That's what it looked like. But the fact that our opponent didn't immediately have Metalcraft caused them to have to play around this Murderous Cut, basically. But it was impossible for them to play around it. Because now we can just get rid of the Vault Scourge. And, yep, that's going to force a game 2. And I didn't think we were going to win that game. Whew, okay. Affinity, not the easiest matchup, but able to take that down. Clearly, we're going to board in Shatterstorm and more removal for the matchup. So we want Izzet Staticaster, we want Magma Spray, we want Engineered Explosives. So the question is, what do we not want? So Brutality we don't really want. It's a little bit slow. Mana Leak on the draw I also don't really like. Because our opponent's just going to dump their hands so quickly. We want to have answers to what our opponent's doing. Similarly, Jataxian Probe is underwhelming. Tasker's only okay. But this configuration seems fine, so let's go with it. And we're just loading up on removal. The matchup does get better after sideboard. So that was crazy because our opponent, if we tap out there, say we go and play Gurmag Angler, our opponent can then kill us by attacking with Etch Champion, and then after we don't block, moving all of the counters onto the Etch Champion. But since we had mana up, our opponent was respecting the Murderous Cut, but there was nothing that they could actually do in order to basically stop us from winning if they sacrificed the Ravager, which was the play that was made. So pretty interesting stuff there. And this is a similar situation to last game, where we really want to leave up Spell Snare, but we also want to get the Delver into play. So it's a close decision, but I like just leaving up the Spell Snare once again. There's so many 2-mana cards that this deck, the Affinity deck, has. And we'll see if... Okay, so it's not going to be a 2-mana card here. It's going to be a Signal Pest. Although our opponent now has 2 mana available. So, yep, there's going to be the Steel Overseer. We're going to Spell Snare that. And pretty happy to have been able to do that. Now we're going to want to Serum Visions. So I like cracking the fetch land first. And interesting, so I don't think we want Delver or Blood Crypt on top, but we're very happy to have drawn Shatterstorm. So we've got a couple really powerful cards in the matchup in our hand in both Kolaghan's Command and Shatterstorm. And we're at a relatively high life total still. But we have to be worried about these lands too. So our opponent's going to activate these Inkmoth Nexuses. So the poison damage now is a very real threat. Let's see if we can flip our Delver. No, we're not going to be able to. So definitely Kolaghan's Command is a card that I would like to play here. But I'd like to get some of these lands off the battlefield with it. Because Shatterstorm can get rid of all of the other artifacts. So here comes the big attack. And I'm going to go ahead and try to get rid of these Inkmoth Nexuses. So it's possible that our opponent has something like a Spell Pierce. Looks like a Galvanic Blast, so that's gonna get rid of the Delver, which is fine. We can simply Shatterstorm away our opponent's board here, and I think that makes more sense than playing the Young Pyromancer. Shatterstorm is just such an amazing card in the matchup. This is what it's here for. And it's going to put our opponent in a rough spot. Even though the rest of our hand is not great. Looks like it's going to be 1 a turn for right now with the Blink Moth. And our opponent doesn't have Metalcraft, so the Mox Opal is just kind of sitting there. But a little bit flooded here, so this definitely could be still a game. Still a game. We really like one of our big threats, like a Tasker would be nice. Snapcaster would be great. We have a lot of really good draws. Not that Ornithopter isn't too scary. But now if our opponent draws a Cranial Plating, that would be really annoying. Alright, so here's the Serum Visions. Not a bad draw for sure. We get to trigger our Young Pyromancer. Then we get another draw. And Spell Snare and Terminate. So a couple good ones on top. And I think we want both of these cards. So we can go ahead and bolt away the Nexus if our opponent attacks with it. So yep, just gonna go ahead, send the bolt at the Blinkmoth Nexus, and it's hard to picture exactly how our opponent's gonna win this game. We could terminate away the Ornithopter, but that seems a little bit aggressive. So just gonna pass. There's a Nexus. So the question is, do we actually want to draw the Spell Snare on top of our deck? I think we do, so not gonna crack the Polluted Delta. And now that our opponent's activated that Nexus, we can go ahead and terminate it. Um, because our opponent has the ability to block, and then you can pump itself with the other ability from the Nexus. So we don't really want that happening. We want to have a pretty fast clock, which is what we have. So Etch Champion would have been the card our opponent was really looking for. Um, Electrolyze is pretty good. We can just get rid of this Ornithopter with it. So let's do that. And there's a Snapcaster Mage. So now I don't see if I don't think our opponent can win now. So yep, just too much gas in the tank for our deck. Just not even gonna play the Snapcaster. Definitely could, but it's just not necessary. So looks like our opponent might be trying one last spell here, but it's just not going to be good enough. Any 2 mana card we can counter with a Spell Snare. We've got Snapcaster. So yeah, there's a Brutality, but we're just going to Spell Snare that, and this should be game over. Yep, that's going to be the game.